So this is Sarah Milligan with the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program. Today's date is August 19th, 2016. This is a CEC interview as a part of the Oklahoma State Stories Oral History Project. And I'm here talking with Tammy Shirley in Cole County, Oklahoma. And we're just going to start a little bit with some of your background. So tell me a little bit about where you're from and who your family is, and a little bit of just general background information.
Okay. I'm from Cole County, Oklahoma. Was born in Colgate, and was raised about 2 miles across the pasture here. And the only time I have not lived in Cole County, Oklahoma were the 4 years that I lived in Payne County, Oklahoma.
Really?
Yes. Was raised, in fact, this was part of the ranch that I was raised on. So I've literally been here my whole life, except when I had to live in town to go to college. And I'm the firstborn, and I have a brother and sister. And my mother died in 2012, and my dad is 81 and still ranches full time. So, and I'm married and I've been married. This is a funny story. Jack and I decided to get married on either my grandpa's birthday or my grandma and grandma's wedding anniversary, which were the second, and one was the 2nd of September, one was the 3rd. And literally, I don't know my anniversary date, and I have to go get the marriage certificate. So anyway, we've been married nearly 30 years. I'm not a big celebration person. And have one daughter, and she is a junior at Oklahoma State.
Which we'll come back to.
Okay.
So does your dad still lives?
He lives, yes.
2 pastures over?
Right. And he runs around 600 mama cows now. And Jack and I run around 135 mama cows. And him turning 80 is what precipitated my decision to go ahead and retire from the Department of Human Services so that he would have a full-time ranch hand. And for the last year and a half, that's what I've done.
So really just to help him keep everything going. What about your other siblings? Are they in the area, or are they out?
They are. My sister is the city treasurer / clerk for the city of Colgate, and she's done that probably 30 years. And my brother works at Coleman at the Sundowner Trailer Manufacturing Plant and lives with Dad, which is a wonderful, wonderful thing because we don't have to wonder if he's in the house by dark. So that works out good for us. Yeah, but we're very close. Daddy's made the comment a lot of times in the last 2 or 3 years when he talks with family or friends or whatever, that he's probably the luckiest man on earth because every time he needs to do something that involves a lot of shuffling cattle around or shipping calves or whatever, that all of his kids are there to help him. So, yeah, we're pretty tight.
That's a
With
good...
that, and of course, my major was in sociology, but I took lots of classes. At that time, it was the College of Home Economics. Lots of family relation classes. And while we're a very close family, we're not an enmeshed family. We're not all up in each other's business all the time, but we know that we're there for each other, and we do spend a good deal of time together.
I like that you qualify that. I do.
I worry about those things because being an oldest in a family, it's real easy to cross a line that you shouldn't be crossing with your younger siblings. So I've worked really hard at that all my life because I'm a real control freak, and I like to, I would like to tell them what to do and how to do it, but I've developed the ability not to through the years.
It sounds like sociology was a good fit for you.
It was, absolutely.
good. Okay, so just a little bit about growing up in Cole County. Where did you go to school, and what was sort of the general size, and how did that fit you?
Okay. I went to grade school at Cottonwood, and there were 8 to 10 people in my class and I went to kindergarten, so it was 9 years. And I didn't ever know anything any different, so it was great. Went on to high school at Colgate and had a graduating class of 40 to 45 somewhere. And again, it was fine because I didn't know anything any different. Was a good student, did the extracurricular like honor society and all that kind of stuff. And but the way that we grew up, Mother and Daddy lived in the house I grew up in, but at that time Daddy worked for the man who owned 3,000 acres right here, and he was his only ranch hand. And as my brother and sister and I got old enough and big enough, we helped Daddy a great deal, helped this gentleman. So we grew up, when we got home from school, Mother and Daddy's cattle, Daddy didn't take care of until after he got off work. So in the winter months when we got home from school, from the time we were probably 9 or 10, we went and helped him feed their cattle. So I don't know, I've done this my entire, I don't ever remember not messing with cattle and doing ranching.
So just because you don't remember not doing it doesn't necessarily mean you have to love it. Do you enjoy it?
I do. And that's interesting because an older cousin called me earlier this week to talk about all this oil field stuff that's going on right now. And she grew up the exact same way. Her mom and dad, that's all they did. And it, lots of similarities. And she and her husband are in the process. Her mother, my dad's sister, died a couple of years ago, and they inherited a lot of land and cattle. And she's actually turned her part over to her sons, and she and her husband are moving to in the process of moving to McAllister. And she told me, she said, to me, it's just been a burden, and her husband's getting to the point that it's physically, they're older, and it's hard for him physically to do the stuff that needs to be done. And she made the observation, she said, I'm not like you. She said, I don't love anything about it. And she said, imagine yourself in a house in McAllister, and that's how uncomfortable I am still being on this ranch. And no, I was approached about getting a master's. I don't remember if it was my junior or senior year. And I remember telling the professor, what I want to do is go back to Cole County, find a job to make a good enough living that I can raise cattle also. So I passed that up. But no, I don't just love it, it's a passion.
Which it seems like it has to be. I mean, I think that's a good story actually to illustrate.
There are, you never, even knowing I was doing this morning and I needed to be cleaned up to some degree, I was over there by 7:30 because we paired up, which means we put the baby calves, young calves with mama cows, and separated them out of a pasture to make room to move 140 heifers home that the 81-year-old and I are going to start calving out in 3 weeks. And we worked yesterday I got over there at 7:30 and got home at 7:30. So we took a lunch break. But anyway, put in lots of hours yesterday doing this. And this morning we had to go and make sure that everything was paired up right. And it wasn't. We had to move a cow and a calf and a cow and a calf back to get it right. But knowing I had this going on, there were still things that I had to go do early this morning. And when we get done here today, we had a tractor go down yesterday that we've got to go pull to the house. And anyway, it's a you never get still. And when we start calving out these heifers, somebody will have to make what I call the bedtime run, which is you go with the spotlight at 10, 11 o'clock, go through them, and put them to bed for the night. And if you've got one calving, you will stay up and wait until she either has a calf or you pull a calf or whatever. So it's not a profession for someone who's not passionate about it.
Yeah.
And lots of people who start doing it as a hobby, that doesn't work out good for lots of folks because you can't, especially in the winter months, Jack and I can't both go do something for 3 or 4 days. I mean, if we do things during winter months, one of us goes and the other stays home and takes care of cattle. So it's not, it's like having small children. You're tied down.
Yeah.
There's always something to do.
Well, so it's interesting that you can't just do it as a hobby, but I also hear you say that you picked a profession that you knew that you could do in addition to.
That's at any time in my lifetime. Now, there was a time, and probably even with Mother and Daddy, and they made it work out. But there was a time when you could buy cattle, and the cattle would pay eventually for themselves and for the property that you needed. That's not the case now, and was not the case in the early 80s when I started out. So you have to work, you have to support yourself because the cattle won't support you up until you reach the point where you've got enough stuff paid off that it goes the other way. So yeah, and in fact, when I bought this place, I was not married at the time, and I was saving $200 a month out of my little paycheck to go toward the mortgage on the place. So you had to work and support yourself, but also to make sure you had money for the place payment, because the cattle at that time they were barely paying their way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and there are things I want to get back to that as well, but before I get too far off. So when you graduated from Colgate High School, and then did you go directly to OSU?
I did.
So how did you make that decision?
At that time, and I graduated high school in 78, and I don't think it was that way everywhere, but in Cole County, Oklahoma, our little guidance counselor they had some kind of standardized test. And I remember this specifically because when he called me in to do the standardized test, he said, you have a unique ability to understand how things work, how like machinery works, and because part of the test was if this gear turns this way, what way? Well, I've worked on hay balers my whole life. That was something at 17, 18 years old that I understood. And he suggested that I go into some type of, I don't know what you would do with those that skill set. But he's also the one that, the only conversation I remember having with my parents in high school about college, we were talking about it, and I remember Daddy saying, well, I think it would probably be a good deal if that's what you want to do. No one in their families, I was the first for Mom and Dad's group to go to college. And but this same guidance counselor guy set us up to take the ACT test. I guess, do you do that your junior year? Okay. And I made a 27 on the ACT, and it was different than, you didn't go to prep classes and you didn't take it 12 times. You just, I got in the car, drove to East Central and took the ACT. But at that time, that was a good enough score to get me a free ride at OSU. And I had considered Eastern over at Wilburton, but economically, that was a sure bet. That was a done deal to go to Oklahoma State. And 2 local older cousins went to Oklahoma State. So it was kind of a family thing, but mostly because I knew that financially I could make that work to do that.
Had you ever been to the campus before you went up there? So no 4-H or anything like that?
Was in 4-H, but at that time I don't know. My daughter did it. I mean, you know, she was up there every other weekend for years, but.
Right, 4-H, the 4-H roundup that tended to happen.
The first time I was on campus was when I went to enroll.
Wow.
In May, if I'm remembering right, before school started in August.
So were your cousins that you knew, were they there at the time?
No, they were older. They had
were
graduated.
So what did you think about it then when you went
I had a complete culture shock. That there was, my best friend in high school went there, but she joined a sorority, which was not anything that appealed to me. And we both lived in Bennett, which was on the far side of the moon from everything on campus. But people, I can remember thinking people were on campus working like piss ants. I mean, it was just, I had never seen that many people at one place in my life. And I had never, ever, ever been around people different than me. The foreign students were a whole new experience. I had never been around homosexuals. It was just different in Cole County, Oklahoma. When I was in high school, we had 1 or 2 black kids, and the rest of us were white or Native American. And it was just a whole different world. But within 2 or 3 weeks, I've always had the ability to adjust to change in whatever's going on. And it was home. I am kind of like my daughter. I never remember having a bad experience there.
So I'm curious because I don't have many people able to articulate. I think some people skirt around the fact that it's very different than maybe their smaller rural community, but I'm curious about that. When you first came on campus and there's so many people, what were some of the things that helped you figure out how to be comfortable in the different kinds of people and then sort of the larger population? Do you remember?
The only specific, in one of the intro classes to something, they had assigned seating, and the girl next to me was Arabic and wore Avon Sweet Honesty perfume, which was probably isn't even in existence anymore, but at the time it was the hot item. I don't wear perfume anymore, so I don't know what's hot now. But this girl, it was my first experience of people having different cultural hygiene practices. And she used Sweet Honesty on top of body odor. And that still, to this day, and now as a very mature adult who's had lots of dealings with people different than me, I would probably have talked to her about that now, you know. And Jacqueline went back to school early because she's the president of Aggie X, and part of her job duty was to greet the new Chinese exchange students week before classes
This is the second
started.
year, right? Second year for that program.
Yes, and one of the things she talks about with those folks is that their hygiene is different. In her words, she's kind of a chip off the old block. Her words to me, she said, they don't understand that in Stillwater they can use all the soap and water they want. I said, but you've got to understand, miss, that that's not their life. That's not even anything that occurs to them probably. Mm-hmm. But if you're comfortable, if you make good enough friends with some of them to talk to them, tell them you'd have a better experience here if you would not have body odor. Mm-hmm. But that's a tough conversation to have.
It's interesting too that was one of your early sort of, I mean, obviously striking enough to still.
And through the years, I thought, I didn't open myself up to personal relationships with any of those folks, probably based on that first impression of that young woman. But we lived, one of the houses that a roommate and I lived in, and it was an old house where they made like 3 apartments out of the old house. There was a guy from Africa who was majoring in something in the College of Agriculture, and he was fun as could be. Would when he cooked the stuff that you could smell all over the block, lots of onions and stuff, he'd ask if you wanted to try it. We had a real good experience with him. And I think the ability to accept change for about anything is part of what I just never did feel traumatized one way or the other by anything.
So would you categorize it as a difficult adjustment?
Probably what I missed, and we're going back to the ranching and stuff, when I got homesick, more than being, or as much as being homesick for Mother and Daddy, it was when I got out of class or off work or whatever, I didn't have that stuff to go do. I didn't have the cattle or the horses or I was in a dorm room or a house or an apartment, and there wasn't anything to go do because that's what I had always spent time doing, and I missed that.
It's also interesting because I think a lot of kids who grew up in ranching families that end up at OSU end up in the ag school. Where that...
Okay. When I was in high school, at Colgate High School, and it wasn't my freshman year, probably my sophomore or junior year, I went to the ag teacher and told him that I wanted to enroll in one of the ag classes, and he told me that young ladies did not do that. And it's ironic because now when you go to FFA activities, which is something, in fact, I've volunteered myself to be a judge at some of their contests here this fall. So, the majority of the kids are girls. And if I had had him in my life, I would probably have ended up in the College of Agriculture. But back to the guidance counselor in 1978 at Colgate High School, it was not, I didn't even know it existed until I got up there. And as I went through school, though, and I got a degree in sociology, I had almost enough hours to have a minor in ag econ. So I took agricultural economics, lots of classes. I took a horticulture class as an elective, and after I got there and had all these hours invested in sociology, I discovered that was there.
So not even until
until I got
Interesting.
I was that ignorant about what was up there.
Did that sort of mentality of it's not a women's field, was that still prevalent once you got to OSU?
I don't think so. I think that I don't remember ever feeling like, but how did one of my little aunts describe that? We were raised, and even she, because she's only 4 or 5 years younger than Daddy, she said, we were raised in a genderless environment as far as responsibility and work was concerned. And that flowed over, and that's how Daddy never made, the only allowances in our life that were made as far as work was concerned. My sister had asthma when she was a child. She could not bale hay, run the equipment that created dust. And oftentimes if she was around the animals where there was dander and dust, and just was in the hospital 2 or 3 times as a child with pneumonia, and Mother and Daddy would not run the risk with her, of her doing these things. So she, on the other hand, learned to cook and learned, how to, in fact, I was thinking last night, Jacqueline went to study abroad to New Zealand at the first of the summer and brought Scarlett and I tea towels home.
Yeah.
I was at Scarlett's the other day, and she has hers on her table, but hers is starched and ironed. I mean, it's hard as a board and looks beautiful. And I thought, oh, that's a sad little tea towel, Tammy. A wrinkled mess. But
different priorities.
Exactly. She learned to iron and sew and learned to, she's a tremendous cook. Got all that from Mother. And I was baling hay, working cattle, and got none of it. So, but I never at home felt, I was the oldest. I was 3 years older than my brother. So for 3 years, I was better able to work and do and be of help than he was. And we just never knew that. And actually, at Colgate High School, that's the only time I ever remember encountering that. So I don't have a true grasp of the fact that in society, and in many societies around the world, that's still a huge stumbling block for women.
I was going to ask that if it was just that sort of incident. Well, and I wonder if, because obviously you were already doing the work, and that person had to have known that you were doing that work. So I wonder, do you have a sense on what the difference that he was saying you weren't able to do?
I don't know. I never did. I didn't pursue it. Or that was it for me.
I wouldn't have as a sophomore either.
If that teacher, felt that way. But by the time my brother got there, because I remember a couple of girls in his class that were in FFA, and I don't know, maybe he rethought it. Maybe I was just the only one in the whole high school at that time that wanted, I don't know what his reasoning was.
That's interesting.
But yeah, I remember that.
So how did you end up in sociology then?
It's the jobs in Cole County that people could make a decent living at were working for the state of Oklahoma, for the Department of Human Services, Department of Health. Those type of jobs were and still are the best paying jobs in this community. And we're back to me wanting to come back to this community and raise cattle and have a good enough job to do that. But intro to sociology, it's just something I've always, which is kind of odd because I really do love messing with cattle and all that. But I loved all those classes. I loved the dynamics of the family relations, child development classes through the college, at that time, the College of Home Ec. And as I got further and further into it, the junior and senior level classes, I just fell in love with them. I loved everything about everything that I took. And I knew that I could come back here. I did not get a degree in social work because I didn't want to be that specific. I wanted to be where you could go to the health department or go or whatever and do things. And I don't know, it just worked out good. My first job out of college was actually with the it's RSVP, Retired Senior Volunteer Program, which was a government grant type job. And I did that for, I guess, 5 years and expanded that program into Atoka and Pontotoc counties and learned lots of stuff, had a good time doing that. But when I was able to get on with the Department of Human Services, it paid much, much better and had better benefits. And stayed with them for 27 and a half years and got my 80 points in. But it was something that I could get a degree in, that I could come back here and have the jobs. And I, because I am so into the cattle and stuff, it may seem odd that I loved doing social work as much as I did, but it was a perfect fit. It never didn't fit.
That's interesting. Okay, I keep saying I do want to talk more about that, but I'm trying not to lose too much of, straying's fine, just not lose some of the other components that I wanted to talk about too. So the 4 years that you spent on campus, you were Bennett Hall, and you also shared an apartment off campus as well. But I'm curious, at that point, what some of the things that you might have done socially, or how you made friends or interacted with people?
Mostly my friends were the people who were on my dorm floor at Bennett. And Amy, that I went to high school with, joined the sorority. And after probably our freshman year, we didn't hang out together a lot. She was very, very busy and had a different social path than I did. So I had these friends on the floor at Bennett that I got really, really tight with. And 2 of them became roommates when we moved out into apartments. So the dorm thing was huge for me because there was no one else up there from the hometown. And it was a big, big deal. And those are the people that all 4 years I did things with. And I had to keep good grades because I was there on scholarships. And even maybe especially as a freshman, I didn't party much, didn't do, I was working 20 hours a week through the work study program and worked at the Department of Financial Aid. So I always carried 15, 16, 17, whatever, carried, a full workload with the classes, and then worked 20 hours a week at the Department of Financial Aid, and spent lots and lots of time, because dorm floors at that time weren't necessarily a good place to study. Spent lots and lots of hours in that library. And socially, I don't know, we were all, Stillwater was so different than it is now. There were 2 or 3 eating places that we would go to and eat out, but mostly I ate in the dorm. And part of that was financial. I didn't have money, to spend on that kind of stuff. I don't even remember if there was a Walmart there or anything like a Walmart at that time. And most of the stuff we did, we just hung out on the dorm floors or at each other's apartments. And on weekends, would go to the Cimarron Ballroom, which was probably a semi-equivalent of Tumbleweeds now. Tumbleweeds actually, I think they started that the last part of my senior year. And the only time I was ever there was when I had a friend that had to go an extra semester. And while she was up there, after I had graduated and went back up there, we went to the Cowboys. It's the only time I was there. But we would go dancing and drinking at Cimarron Country Ballroom, and would occasionally go to the Strip and go to a bar or two down there. Mm-hmm. But I never, in high school, I didn't imbibe at all. And I was a light. That was never anything that appealed to me a great deal. So I didn't do very much of that. Smoked dope twice. That was a big thing on campus. We were in the late 70s and early 80s, and there was lots and lots of marijuana and lots of people experimenting with other things.
So it's interesting, if most of your social circle you found through the dorm, and that was something that you saw the pressure from that for, in what sort of situation would that have happened? You know, was it out in public places? Was it when you went to visit friends in apartments?
It was two of the girls on the dorm floor dated guys that were in the same circle. And those young men were the dope smokers. And when we were at their apartments or at other people's apartments, that was going around. And I remember, well, I tried it twice, and that was kind of like the alcohol. It's just something that didn't do anything for me. And my roommate at the time was a teetotaler as far as the dope went. And I remember her saying after the last little dope party, she said, "What the hell?" She said, "It's just a bunch of people sitting around in a circle not doing anything. What about that? It's fun." And I decided she was right. So she and I quit going to the dope parties. And I thought at the time, you know, it would devastate Mother and Daddy if I got in legal issues over some of this stuff. And it just wasn't, it absolutely wasn't worth doing, you know. And those two young men were also the first time that I ever had to come face to face with homosexuality.
Really?
Actually, I grew up in Wardville. There was a woman named Tommy Andrew who and you're going to think I'm ignorant as hell when I tell you this, but my whole life I knew her. She wore men's khakis, men's Western shirts, a Western belt, had a man's haircut. How you can grow up. But think again, this was before cell phones and before, anyway, Facebook and all the public stuff. My social circle growing up was Mother and Daddy, my siblings, had cousins that we spent Sunday with every Sunday of my life. We were at their house or they were at ours for dinner. Most of the other cousins in the area were older, so I didn't run with them a great deal. Had the friends here at Colgate, and 8 people in grade school and then 40 people in high school that were still all just exactly like I was, period. Had known this woman my whole life, was out of high school before I realized that she was homosexual. And my grandmother finally told me, she said, "Tammy, she's had a woman friend that's lived with her at Atoka your whole life." What? You know, and it never, I just thought she was cool because she ranched. That's what she did. She was very good at it. And I just respected her, the clothing and all. How can you not clue into that stuff? I mean, but I didn't. I'm telling you the honest truth. I did not until I was grown realize that this woman was homosexual. It was never in.
Did you know what homosexuality was?
I did, but it was never anything discussed. Mother and Daddy would never have talked about that. Daddy still wouldn't. never heard anything like that come from
So
him.
if your grandmother was the one to tell you that that's what was happening, was there any sort of value judgment placed on that? Did she have
Yes, because I was a true tomboy. I mean, jeans, flannel, and I've reverted back to that again. I wear flannel and t-shirts and jeans and have 2 blouses to wear to church with my jeans. But anyway, I've always worn my hair relatively short because it's such a mess. It's just too damn hard to deal with. And I was the same way when I was a kid. And she was cautioning me about dressing that way and not to be like Tommy Andrew. And I go, well, grandmother, what's wrong with Tommy Andrew? And then she told me, and then I knew. But anyway, to get back to the story about the doorman at college, the young man that my friend dated, he was so much fun and would just show up, and if Andy wasn't on the floor, he would knock on doors till he found someone and invite himself in and visit. And he was a different kind of guy than I had ever known because he was attentive and he was different to talk to. And Andy came back to the dorm one night and was squalling and bawling and carrying on. And I was the person anyone squalling and bawling and carrying on came to for an ear. And he had told her that night that he was bisexual. And it hit me like a brick. I don't know. And a side story to that, this is when the AIDS stuff was full blown. And she had to deal with that like for 8 or 10 years because she didn't know he died from AIDS.
Mm-hmm. So they were sexually active, and then so she had to stay testing and stuff
Right,
for that long.
right. And it's a scary deal. But 10, 12 years later, I heard through her that he had died.
So that's that's a whole different perspective on this as well. So not only, is at campus and it's a different place, but that was this period where right before the AIDS scare, right at the beginning of when sort of AIDS became a thing. And it's not easy for me to conceptualize what OSU's campus was like during that time period. Were people openly gay? Were people people talking about AIDS or
not really? And I remember us having a conversation where he socialized with men. There was a bar there somewhere that I never frequented. But it was not an open, there were way too many redneck boys on campus for guys or probably even girls to have felt real comfortable with that. And it was not, and we talked about there was a girl on our dorm floor who probably was gay, but she never openly, that was just us surmising. From her dress and her behavior and her activities that she probably was.
So through your friendship with this individual, did he talk much about how his sexuality impacted his life or his experience on campus?
He never talked with me about that. And at that, shortly after that, Andy broke up with him. And unless you just happened upon him at campus, I didn't follow through with that friendship. But I'm going to tell you, it was a tough time for kids to be on campus.
Why was it a tough time?
They just, folks being gay, it was almost still like being in Cole County. Now, people in Cole County who have different sexuality than just hetero, that's something that still is suppressed here. And to me it's real sad because they can't be open in their relationships and they can't live what I would think of as a normal life here because people are still so judgmental, and or maybe their perception is that people, are.
So you're a good example of someone who spent all but 4 years of their life in Cole County, and you, it seems like you have sympathy towards that, right? And you'd be fine with them.
I am. And that's probably from working with the public for as long as I did. Because it's, you get to the point where as long as people take care of their own business and take care of their children, you don't care, what else they do. It doesn't make any difference. And those folks are just, they're just folks. They should have the same freedoms and they shouldn't worry about going out to dinner with the love of their life and encountering biases. And I think maybe now, well, you'd have better luck now than you would have in the 1980s in Cole County, but it's still not an open thing. You won't see boys walking down the street holding hands or flirting with each other. Mm-hmm. Not here. And I think probably most people maybe wouldn't care anymore, but you don't encounter it. It's not. Now, Jacqueline tells me, actually in high school, that the kids that were very open, but I wasn't, I wasn't there enough to know. But maybe things are changing here. Maybe with her generation, things will be different here.
I was wondering too if that was some of it was generational.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So we talked a little bit about this before we started recording, but I want to talk a little bit about it on the record too. We talked about the differences in being able to finance school and sort of how that impacted how you went through school, but also what you chose. You talked about having a scholarship, but I'm curious too is what was the financial situation for you going into school, and how were you able to cope with that while you were there?
That I, from the time I was a really small child, all of the orphan calves that we had, and if you have cows that, in fact, I've got 5 or 6 down here on a feeder now that we've raised on a bottle in the last year. You have that. And the gentleman that Daddy worked for, all of his orphan calves came to our house. It started out me getting the first one, my sister Scarlett the second, and my brother Matt the third. And Mother and Daddy would rotate and keep up with that. And at the time that I started college, and the heifers we would keep as cows that would produce calves. When I started college, I had $10,000 in a savings account, which for Mother and Daddy, that's more than they had in available money at that time. So I had that to fall back on. It was like you had talked about with your grandmother. It was a precious thing. It was not to be toyed with or taken for granted. So when I went to Stillwater, I had the tuition waiver scholarship. I got enough grants to pay the housing cost, what I made with my little work study, and the money that I earned from summer jobs that I put into a checking account is what I had to spend. I went through school without ever touching that little nest egg. And like I said earlier, I just simply didn't go out to eat. I didn't spend much money. But Mother and Daddy never contributed and didn't have the ability to contribute another dime to that. But I was fine because I had lived my whole life without much extra, without any extra money. That mother and daddy just simply never had that. And it almost makes me proud, which is not a good thing for people. Pride is the devil. I have to work on that too. But I'm really proud in a way of the fact that my daughter does not qualify for a dime of financial aid, because, and Jack and I have talked about that, that means I've accomplished something with my little deal. And because it was a very, very different thing. And she goes to each semester with what she's earned at her little summer jobs, but she has enough to go out to eat if she chooses to. And that's a different thing. Couldn't buy a t-shirt, at the t-shirt store. I had to be that careful with money. But that's something that was a learned behavior, because I had spent my whole life knowing that you had to be very, very careful with your money to have enough. And I always paid, whatever was due was paid before anything else.
So what were the grants you had? Were those federal grants then?
They were fed, yes. At the time they called them DEOG and SEOG, and some of them were federal and some were state. But they were grants. They were not loans.
Right.
And so I got out of school debt free because the government and the school with the tuition waivers provided the funds for me to do that.
How important do you think that side of, I understand that was the attractiveness, the tuition waivers, attractiveness to get there, but how important was it for you to leave tuition or to leave debt free? It
was very important to me, because I think the same thing that kids face now. If you leave up there owing thousands and thousands of dollars, you can't, how do you ever get ahead of that? And through the years, I worked with people who were in their mid to late 30s that were still paying on student loans. And I think that that's tragic. I think that we're, as a society in the United States, we're doing something wrong when people, and I don't know that everyone going to college free is the answer. I'm not that far left, but there has to be some middle ground. Because the reality is, if Jack and I had 2 more kids, putting them through college, we'd be talking about a whole different financial situation. Because that's lots of cash to put down.
That's true. It's not going down either. No, that's helpful. So one more thing just about campus, and if there's anything else about your time there, feel free to share that. But I was thinking about the discussion about how on campus during that time period that there were, there was sort of a lot of things happening. It was this period of time where people were experimenting with drugs. There was sort of culture. It's also coming off of the sort of post-Vietnam protest era. I'm just curious if there was there activity on campus with the students? Was there restlessness, or was there or did things seem peaceful?
No, we had a peaceful, and it may have been that everyone up there was smoking dope and they were just all real laid back. I don't know. Everyone but me and Stephanie were smoking dope. But no, we were a pretty, I don't remember any unrest. It was and the library, because this was before computer, before electronic books. The library was a very central place for everyone up there. It was hard to find a little stall to sit at, but it was the most wonderful place on campus for me, because you could go there and study. And I finally found a little niche, like up on one of the top floors where not many people were, and I claimed it almost, but lots and lots of kids you still had to go there to do research papers. You didn't have the you had to go to the library and get the book, to be able to study and do your work. So there was lots and lots of folks there all the time until they closed at whatever time they closed of the night. The student union was a big, busy place because that was, unless you wanted to walk back to the dorm to Bennett, to have lunch, that's where you had lunch every day. And lots of activity there, people out on the lawns when the weather was nice. But it was very, very different than it is now. It was tiny compared, to what it is now. But it was still a big, big campus. And I think, no, we were a peaceful, we were pretty laid back. Yeah. No, I don't remember anything that.
I was, in my head, there was nothing triggering from that time period, but
it was now, and now they have calf fry, then Streaker's Night was still.
Right.
Yeah.
That would have been.
Yeah. We went down to the strip, and it seems like to me it was the Tuesday, I don't remember now when it was, but around spring break, and everyone would,
Really?
would hit the strip, yeah. And
so this is one of those things that I'm just curious about, because is it one of those things that there was an expectation that there would be streaking by that point, or
it was just a party night?
Everybody did it, or one person did it?
No, you wouldn't. I don't remember ever seeing but one actually at a distance. Now, on the other hand, when that all started at Colgate High School during a football game, Woody Phillips came out from under the bleachers and went down the field. Funniest damn thing ever.
Did he get caught?
He did and got arrested. Yeah, it was. So we even had that in Cole County, Oklahoma. But in Stillwater, it was a party night. It was just I think before spring break, maybe, if I'm remembering right. And it was just when the campus congregated down on the strip and people drank and smoked dope and whatever. But it was just a party, kind of like I perceive calf fry being now.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because, obviously that was built on there being a real streaker culture, and then it sort of led into this legacy of. Yeah. What about like homecoming and things like that?
That was a big deal. We did the house floats at Bennett, and it was just, I loved, and I went to high school games, but I went to nearly all the home football games just because, it's like it is now. It was just fun. It was just a community of people enjoying, what they were doing.
Yeah.
And at Bennett, to get to campus at that time, you had to walk in front of the football stadium. And late in the afternoon, after they were finished practicing, the players would sit outside, so you had to walk by Dexter Manley to get back and forth. And it was just always fun. It was a fun thing. But the football games were big. And I went to a lot of basketball games and wrestling matches. And again, it was all right there at Bennett, so it was easy, in the evenings or whenever they played to get there. And they would have concerts on campus. Emmylou Harris came, and she was in the basketball stadium. And I saw Asleep at the Wheel. They were actually in the Saratine Center. For that, it was a real small venue, but they were there. And so we went to that kind of stuff and enjoyed that. But there wasn't a lot of it. There, just occasionally we would have those opportunities.
It was organized by campus, campus.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
But at that time, again, Stillwater was just a little bitty town on the prairie, and you didn't have any of the shopping places and the eating places and all that. So there wasn't just a lot to do there.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned there were maybe 3 restaurants you all could go to.
We went to Hideaway, and there was an Italian restaurant on the strip called Bill's. And there was actually a bar on the strip that made like nachos and that kind of stuff. And we would go there.
Yeah.
And other than that, we didn't. McDonald's every now and then, but we didn't Yeah. The campus food was as good as what you could get other places. And the group of people I ran with, again, they were frugal, and we just didn't do a lot of that. There wasn't a lot of social opportunity.
When you did discover that there was an agricultural program that was open to you, did that change some of the things that you did? Did you have more opportunity to do agriculture related, or hang out with cows more, or that fix?
Because I took the classes in agricultural economics as opposed to the husbandry type classes, and again, it was late in the game, and I didn't financially have the option of being a fifth year student. And when the approach about working on a master's degree came from a professor in the College of Home Economics in like the family relationship type stuff.
Yeah.
And at that point, that was my senior year. And at that point, I was tired of going to school, and I was tired of being broke. And that's what I told him. I said, no, I'm finishing and going to work somewhere. You know, I'm not going to keep being this broke and being, and that's what I did.
Did he try and try and incentivize it?
He did. I was offered at that time they called it a fellowship, where I would do like teaching the lower level classes, and no, he offered the financial ability to do that, and I told him no, I was going home, and that's what I did. And I don't have lots of regrets in my life, but looking back, like 10, 12 years later, looking back, that's something I regret not taking advantage of. Because when I briefly thought about working on a master's degree, you would have to drive to Ada or Durant after work to do that, and I never did pursue that.
That's one of the things I was going to ask is, what would have been the benefit for you, looking back at your career? What would have been the benefit for you to have a master's?
Possibly when I started applying for like supervisory positions, that possibly would have played into that, but that wasn't what got me supervisors, what got me promotions. So I think really school was the easiest thing I've ever done in my life. Always. School, I don't remember ever being overwhelmed by a class. And I loved, and I've made the comment a lot of times through the years, that if I actually lived 5 minutes from Ada as opposed to 35 minutes from Ada, that I would probably take classes all the time, because I'm just that curious and I enjoy that kind of stuff. But I don't, and it wasn't worth driving an hour a night to do, so I never did pursue anything.
Right. Okay, so you made the decision to come back to Cole County, which was always in your plan. So tell me a little bit about that. You mentioned that your first job out was with this RSVP. So how did you find that, and was it easy to re-enter into Cole County after being gone? And
yes, I've just always been a part of here. That job, they just had an opening, and I went and talked to him, and actually started out as like a secretary bookkeeper for the program, and the woman directing it retired within 6 months, and I just, which I think probably was part of their plan, was for me to transition into that. And the powers that be from like the little state office immediately approached me about broadening it into other counties in the area. And when you're young, you have lots of energy and lots of want to about that kind of stuff. And I did. And it worked out good. And it was a fun thing, because you worked with people 60 and over and got them to volunteer to do all kinds of things in this community. And I had a lot of fun working that and doing that. Learned at that point in my life that you could become really good friends with people 60 years older than you, and that whatever age group you're in didn't invent drinking and partying and folks have always had the same social and personal issues, and I didn't know that until then. That's where I learned that it doesn't matter how old you are, you're having possibly the same issues all your life. You know, it was a good experience for me.
How did they receive you being, gosh, you would have been early 20s, right?
Mm-hmm. They were, after they got to know me, they were okay with it. I don't remember having problems with them. And maybe I wasn't perceptive enough to pick up on that. But anyway, I've always had the ability. I don't remember ever not being able to get along with people, younger or older. I had, as a supervisor, a few problems with the millennials because they just think and do differently. But they sent me to training, so I'd understand.
Did it help?
It did.
Really?
Did. Yes, it did.
What were some of the, this is off, but what are some of the things they told you that made that click for you?
They think differently. They've been raised differently. They have the ability to use their electronic devices while they are doing other things. So I didn't need to get my panties in a wad about someone being at their desk with their phone. That they have the ability, they know how to do that and pay attention to what's on the computer screen in front of them. And they don't mind task jumping. They can multitask. It's not an issue for them. Just because they're doing this and doing this doesn't mean they're not paying attention to both things.
Well, that's interesting. Anyway, it was interesting. Okay, so you also mentioned that you moved from the RSVP position to when something opened up at DHS. Partly, it sounds like because of the stability and the salary.
Right.
But I'm curious what that position was and what it was like once you actually got into it.
I started out as a social worker with what was called an ABD caseload, which was working with the aged, blind, and disabled. And in Cole County, we had one blind person that I remember. So it was with people 65 and low-income folks, 65 and older, and younger people who had been determined disabled of the Social Security Administration. And I think working with the older people with the RSVP program prepared me for this caseload, and it was just determining their financial eligibility for Medicaid and food stamps and that type of thing. And you just worked, in fact, at that time we didn't do a lot of phone interviews. Each year you had to review their eligibility, made sure that they didn't have over $2,000 in assets, and that they were still entitled to these little monthly benefits. But it's a good place for a social worker to start out, because again, you figure out that just because someone's 70 doesn't mean they're not having issues with alcoholism, drug addiction, divorce. You know, they have the same issues. And the disabled population, I didn't know that people had schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, or that you could be so physically unable or mentally unable to work. And now that goes back to being real accepting of people. People who Cole County will judge because they don't work somewhere. When I hear people make that comment, I will challenge them with, well, you tell me what he can do. Tell me, think of a job this man could do and make enough money to pay rent and utilities. And when people start thinking about people's abilities, even though they may look healthy and appear to be fine, if you know them at all, it doesn't take you long to decide, no, Social Security's right about this one. You know, they're not employable. There's not a job that we can think of that they could do. And that's a tough spot for people to be in. And Cole County has, to my way of thinking, has a high population of folks who are not employable. We're a really, really poor county, and I never knew that before. But of course, growing up, I didn't consider myself to be poor. We obviously were. But
so I'm hearing a correlation between poverty and unemployment. I understand there's a correlation there, but employable and the poverty level is interesting to me. Is that tied to education? I mean, what do you think makes Cole County a higher level?
Part of it was education, because I still have people I talk to that I consider friends that in these little rural schools, when we left the 8th grade, there was a group of boys at Lehigh that didn't leave to go to high school. 8th grade was it. And they work hard and have good jobs and good lives. I'm not saying that, but yeah, we have a real high rate of people who are not functionally literate, that have a hard time. And as a social worker, you had to be real aware of that when you flip pieces of paper at people. I mean, they couldn't struggle through that and know what it was that you were asking them to sign. We have a high rate still at that time, and still, of teen pregnancy. So you have little girls having babies. A lack of jobs. That's never in my lifetime, I don't think, other than when we have the occasional oil and gas boom activity. Then there's if you have guys making 30, 40 bucks an hour working on oil rigs, that means they're going to leave waitresses better tips. They're going to rent housing in the area. It just, everything here picks up a little. There are more jobs for people to clean apartments and to clean motel rooms, and you know, the quick stops have to have more employees. There are jobs for people without a lot of skills, is what I'm describing. And but at other times, as a general rule, there aren't. And even working at the dollar store, can you really support a family or yourself making $7.25 an hour? And when you think about that and think about people paying rent and utilities, it's impossible. You know, there aren't good jobs here. There aren't jobs that you can make a good living at.
What's the population of Cole County, roughly?
I'm thinking around 6,000, maybe, where there aren't many of us.
Is the industry primarily agriculture?
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah. And in the last 20 years, we had a rainbow plant, and that shut down. That was a big employer. Our biggest employer now is probably the hospital and nursing home complex, as far as numbers. And there aren't that many of them. So we're back to the good jobs, you know. And
so it sounds to me like this was a surprise to you whenever you started working with that population.
it was, yeah.
How did you sort of internalize that? How did you deal with that?
I grew up and realized that just because I thought people needed to work 12 and 14 hours a day, that's not, back to realizing that someone with schizophrenia is not employable. These old people who had worked as waitresses and cooks at restaurants and as farm hands and whatever, didn't draw enough Social Security to cover their expenses, so they needed public assistance, you know, to be able to live. And a lot of especially the older people, it wasn't that they didn't work hard, it was that they worked as waitresses or they stayed home and raised their babies, because that's what mamas in Cole County did at that time in history. when they got old and relied on Social Security pensions, there wasn't enough there, you know, to pay their bills and meet their needs. And working long-term care, which was folks who needed nursing care, nursing home care, their monthly pensions wouldn't be anything like meet that. So the families would come in and apply for them. And that was a sad time in people's lives. It was a sad time in my life when Mother went to the nursing home. And you're dealing with people with high emotions and helping them get enough money, you know, helping them get Medicaid to pay for mama or daddy's or an uncle's or whatever's nursing care. And it's a tough job. You have to be really tuned in to the fact that people, they're not, just because they need public assistance doesn't mean that they're sorry, or doesn't mean, you know, that they didn't work hard and weren't, have a strong work ethic or whatever.
So part of what is a stereotype of rural areas like Cole County that's primarily white, that's primarily working class, it's one of the stereotypes that you think of is that there is a prejudice against people on public assistance. How do you counteract that narrative? Because it sounds like you don't agree with that. I mean,
yeah.
So how do you, as a community member, address that?
I'm vocal and just tell people, you know, you don't have any, and typically the folks who complain, because the reality is when Jacqueline was in public school, because when you do social work in a tiny community, your clients are also the people who you see in the grocery store every time you go, who you see in a dollar store every time you go, who you sit next to at ball games, who are your daughter's classmates. They go to church with you. They're not a separate, they're part of the community. When Jacqueline was in school, 75% of her classmates were on Sooner Care. Because I knew that. I mean, you know, I knew that. So, and lots of the families from time to time got food stamp benefits. And I just pointed it out to people. I do point it out to people when I hear, you know, that's what, and if you're an employer and you're only paying this guy $8 an hour, how do you expect him to feed 2 kids? How do you expect him and his wife to pay for daycare, which is astronomical? You know, these folks have to have help paying these costs. And will, with time, get to the point in their lives where they don't have to rely on that. But it's just, we're a poor, people don't pay people anything. Daddy pays a ranch hand $10 an hour, and he's single. He's a kid. Well, I call him a kid. He's probably 21 by now. But the reality is, if he gets married, he's probably not going to get to keep his $10 an hour job. He's got to have, you know, more income than that. But the jobs here, again, we're back to the hospital probably pays decent, but they start their nurses' aides out at maybe $8 an hour, which is still, it's nothing in the real world where people are having to pay bills. They struggle every hour of their lives. And it's a sad, sad deal.
This has been an interesting conversation. So, did you stay in the aged, blind, and disabled, the ABD program for most of your career? Or did you move?
No. I've done, and I think it's because the work ethic plays in, and I'm learning the policy, and we're back to people that do well on an ACT have a knack for learning and for for leaving OSU with a 3.8 GPA, that stuff comes easy. The learning the policy, the learning the how things work at the Department of Human Services. And that coupled with a strong work ethic, which meant I never left anything undone or done sloppily. I had lots of different, that after I mastered that, they moved me on to food stamps and then on to long-term care Medicaid, and I did everything within the eligibility. When, let me think, that would have been in 1994, Jack and I had a tragedy. We had a daughter die at 21 weeks, and I was real stressed out about that. And at work, I was carrying a huge caseload and was real stressed out about that, and had talked to a supervisor about the fact that I had more to do than I could get done, and nobody resolved that. So I switched to child welfare at that point and mastered child welfare. Loved working Children's Protective Services. Also at that time, the eligibility workers, before I went to child welfare, I was the Adult Protective Services worker for the county and loved that. Loved the protective services. But I had too damn much to do, period. And with the little crisis in the personal life, went to child welfare, loved it, loved the work, because you knew at the end of the day you had done things and made decisions that had positive impacts on children's and their families' lives. Jacqueline was born in September of 1995, a little over a year after Caitlin died. The first baby that I had to take custody of, it was a black family in Atoka. At this point, I was doing the investigations for Cole and Atoka counties, because I tend to be good at whatever I do, or I quit doing it. That's why I don't cook much. I don't have an knack for that. But after Jackie was born, I was at a family's home. The hospital had called and said, we're sending a young mom home. She is developmentally delayed, and we have real concerns about her ability to take care of this baby. I get to this very impoverished home in Atoka County. Mom is a young mom who's quite developmentally delayed. I explore Dad's family. Dad is quite developmentally delayed. And Mom lives with her mom, who is developmentally delayed. I get there and there are baby bottles around the house where they haven't shook it hard enough for the powder has settled out, and the baby at 2 weeks old was already failure to thrive. I took custody of that baby with the police escort and put her in my daughter's little carrier in the back seat of my truck. And when I looked in the rearview mirror, Mama was being restrained by police officers screaming and crying. We didn't take custody of that baby because the mama didn't love it. There was lots of maternal love there. She just didn't have the ability to care for an infant. And I think that's the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. And I made the decision that with a baby, part of it was being on call with a baby and 100 mama cows. That doesn't work real well. But most of it was that I was impacted by that situation and thought, as long as I've got all these hormones going on, I guess, and this baby of my own, I'm not well equipped to deal with families in that kind of crisis. And at that point, the supervisor from the eligibility thing, they had decided that they would like to have me back working eligibilities with a lighter caseload, because the two people that had in the interim It all didn't work out real well. So I went back to eligibility, and by that time we were working comprehensive caseloads, and everything had gone to computer stuff, and we hired some younger people who could do all that, and things got really good in eligibility. And not too long, well, no, I did that several years, and someone finally talked me into doing supervisory stuff by telling me that I would get the same degree of satisfaction out of having coworkers as clients as opposed to just working with clients, and that proved to be true. I hit my stride with supervision. It was the best thing that I ever did. I loved it.
So how long did you do that? Were you supervisor?
4 years, I think, before I retired. And it was good. I was good at it, and enjoyed it, and am glad that I did it before I retired.
So there's one thing that strikes me through a couple different parts of thinking about being a social worker in a small community. Not only do you know what everybody does, everyone knows what you do, right? So looking back on that, how does your relationship with the community? I mean, is that different than other people you know? Is it?
Sure, because it's an example at church now, and I don't hit it every Sunday morning if things are going on with the cattle or whatever, but I try real hard. The Methodist Church in Colgate does communion the first Sunday of each month, and it doesn't matter what else is going on, I go that Sunday because one of my former clients is a developmentally delayed gentleman. He's older, he's 61 or 2 probably. He irritates other people because he's very, very childlike, and he rides the church bus each Sunday morning to church. Months ago at communion one Sunday morning, when he reached to get the little juice cup, he spilled it, and it really, really, really upset him. So now at church I sit by Mike, and on communion Sunday we go up together and I get his juice. I completely eliminate that anxiety for him. I'm not saying that other people in the church wouldn't do it if they were aware of it, but I'm aware of it, and I know his issues. In the community, I'm still a resource. I still get phone calls. A year and a half out, I'm still doing social work because you develop a relationship of trust, and people that no one else in the community knows they had to get food stamps for a year because they were up against it. We're very, very careful with confidentiality because it can be a game breaker in this community. And you just have to be cautious and careful because even though 75% of them at some point have gotten public assistance, there's still a bias in the community toward folks that need that.
Are you comfortable maintaining that role even though you've retired?
Yes, yeah. And typically what I do is tell them I don't have the ability to directly help them anymore, but I can guide them in where they need to go. In fact, I've got a neighbor down the road who's, he's an adolescent, had a bad four-wheeler wreck and has lost 50% of the hearing in one ear. She works at a hardware store, probably making $8.50 an hour. I don't know whether Dad pays child support. It's not my business. But when I was in the hardware store this week and asked about Tyler, I told her, I said, you need to come to my house because this kid, until he turns 18, will, I just know, qualify for SSI. And I said, this means $750 a month coming to your house that you don't have now. And I said, we're not going to label him disabled, and you and I will have that conversation with him because our expectation is that by the time he gets out of high school, he's going to either go on to trade school, college, or be fully employable. I said, this isn't, but I said, in the meantime, this $750 a month can get you a computer for him where he can learn to do something else. It can get you the specialized Medicaid where he has the right hearing aid or a cochlear implant or whatever. I said, we're going to do this for this kid. And it's something she didn't even know about. So, and I know who to send her to down at the DHS office to get it done. So no, I don't mind doing that and talking to people. And last year, we were eating out, which is something we don't do real often, but when we do, it's in town and we go a whole 6 miles.
Yeah,
like it's a big deal, you know. But we were eating out at a Mexican restaurant, and a young woman came up and slid into the booth with me and said, you will never know how much of an impact you had on our lives and how much I appreciate. I didn't know her, didn't have a clue who she was. And I acted like I did and looked at the pictures of the kids and finally recognized a kid or two and figured out, you know, who she was. But that's a really rewarding thing. Or to see pictures in the paper of a kid that's an adolescent now where she's a cheerleader or what, I don't know, whatever she was doing. That her mom, when I first started working with that family, was using meth. And to know that mama came out of that and has been employed now for years, has good jobs, you know, has worked hard and is employed. And this little girl is dressed better than my kid ever was, because she has hair bows and things. But that is, you can't imagine how rewarding that is, because you know that you had a direct impact. And that woman will still come hunt me up if she sees me to talk. And that's, you don't get that if you live in Oklahoma City or Tulsa. That's a reward of doing that type of work in a rural community. Now, on the other hand, you still get people who will now come up and tell me what a bitch I was, you know, and that doesn't bother me either. I don't care. I knew all along that I was doing the right thing with families, and anytime I did the wrong thing, I would go back. I don't have a problem with telling people when I've screwed up or I'm wrong or whatever. That's one of those things, and I don't care if it's in your personal life or your professional life. When you know that you jacked something up, the thing to do is just go tell people, I've jacked this up. And but you're back to we're all one community, and we have to. The only time I've been uncomfortable and I've backed out of something recently at church, they started a program anyway, trying to target lower income folks and get them involved in things and all. And I got real discouraged early on with the fact that the women in the church, some of the women in the church who were doing this had no clue. And Jacqueline, God forbid, went with me that Sunday to this one. And they made, as part of it, they incorporated homemaking. And wonderful, I mean, it's a good deal, really. But at the end of it, they made smoothies. And one of the women, because we had the lower income there, said, oh, this is so much better if you'll use almond milk. And the girl doing the program that day was one of the lower, and it was for her to step up and speak in front of anyone, that was I could go to the conventions of the presidential candidates, and that stuff doesn't bother me at all. But for this girl to get up and do the program and then do the demonstration on the smoothies, she had bought the off-brand milk that we have available here, and Best Choice frozen strawberries, and her choices were based purely on the fact that was cheaper, and that's what she bought for her family. And Jacqueline pointed out for someone, and this lady, someone Jacqueline loves. I mean, probably loves as much as she loves me. Adores her. But for this person to suggest almond milk instead of Best Choice whole milk, there's not, the powers that be don't have any idea what poverty is. And I thought, I'm the one that's not a good fit for this program. And I backed up on it because of that. Mm-hmm. And I thought about it later, and I thought, on the other hand, these ladies are loving these women. They are embracing them. One of them bought them a $60 blender because the lady didn't have a blender to make smoothies with. I don't have a blender. But it's not the best intentions of the world, and that they're not doing this with absolute love and faith. Mm-hmm. I wasn't the good fit for that. And that's the opportunity to do social work that I've backed out on, because I wasn't a good fit for that. Mm-hmm. I was too sensitive about, and I wasn't a good fit.
It's important to know that about yourself, though.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
So I'm also thinking about this in the context of your daughter is obviously a really vibrant part of your life, because she comes up a lot in the stories you tell. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking about the conversation about coming back to a small town and what it means to live in a small community. Is she coming back after she spends her time at OSU?
She inherited a love of the cattle industry from me and her papa. There's a real distinct, identifiable line in the family of where the passion went. And it went, my dad is passionate, my brother is mostly passionate, my sister has learned to be passionate, I've always been passionate, my husband will work his heart and guts out on any project that I say, Jack, we need to, or he often identifies the structural, barns, fences, and those kinds of things. Feeding season until I retired, he and Jacqueline did most of the feeding until she left to go to Stillwater. But the passion from Papa to me to Jacqueline, very, very passionate about it. On the other hand, her study abroad to New Zealand was the most fun, exciting thing she's ever done in her life. And next summer, instead of coming home to work at the bank, she is working on doing an internship with Superior Video cattle auction stuff based in Fort Worth. And I have cousins in Fort Worth who are very, very, very upwardly mobile. Probably they've topped out by now, who have a new home in Fort Worth, who have never had children, who are friends on Facebook and great fun. So she's planning on next summer, I think, living in Fort Worth. So I don't know. The other thing I inherited was my parents' ability to let my child make her own choices. So I don't know, it's up to her. Mm-hmm. She's still on weekends that we're working cattle and doing that kind of stuff. She comes home without fail and works her guts out. But on the other hand, weekends that we don't have something going on, she doesn't come home. So I don't know. I'm not going to pressure her one way or the other. That's going to be her choice. And it's a real hard thing for me because the summer she was 13, it was in July before she turned 14, she had a farm accident. And she was raking hay and bumped a power pole in a hay meadow. And the electric line fell off the pole and broke. And now we're surmising this because everyone else was over a hill from her. We're surmising that one end of it set the hay meadow around her on fire. The other end of it was laying on her equipment. She's a 5'2" or 3" tiny girl. And she was on a 90-horse tractor, which means that to get on or off of it, she holds on. We all women do. We're not built for big tractors. When she stepped off that tractor, she grounded. And anyway, I was on a break that afternoon at the public library, getting a book, checking out a book. And when I got back to my truck, I noticed my cell phone, which was a God thing because I typically couldn't tell you exactly where my phone is at any given moment. But the office had tried to call, which was an odd thing when someone was taking a 15-minute break. And I called the girl back, and she said, you need to go to the hayfield at Shady Grove right now. Just go. And I did, and when I got to the hayfield, which is, it took me about probably 20 minutes because it's over where the moonshiners were in Etobicoke County. I got there and saw all the firefighters and I pulled up, and my nephew, who is 2 months older than Jacqueline, said, Aunt Tammy, and he's the one that called 911, called him and said, you need to send, because he topped the hill with a hay baler, and called the city and said, you need to send fire trucks and an ambulance now. And they were all there by the time I got there. He said, Jacqueline's up in the ambulance, Aunt Tammy, and he's crying. And my daddy's out there crying, and I thought, well, shit, what? I get to the ambulance, and my child is sitting up on a gurney in the ambulance, and they have just gotten her boots off, and I can see the bones in both feet. And she has on a polka dot Walmart bra. Her shirt has burned off of her, so there's skin hanging from her arms. She is complaining, Mother, tell them to stop cutting these jeans off me because I have to buy them. Because I would buy her Walmart jeans or Levi's, but she was wearing Cruel Girls at the time. They cost $70 a pair. And she said, they're ruining these jeans and they have to give me a drink of water because I'm getting dehydrated. So she just, yeah. A helicopter lands at the hayfield, and she says, I'm not getting on the helicopter. They can forget it. And I finally go, can y'all, and the medics, and another God thing, in Cole County, you don't have full-blown medics. That day, there were 2 on duty at the Colgate ambulance service. So they've already started an IV. The helicopter lands, and I'm signing the papers, and she's going, I'm not getting on a helicopter, you can forget it. And they say, we need to sedate her. And I said, well, I think that's probably a good thing. But as a mother, you can imagine the terror. So by the time I get home and gather up some things, someone has found Jack. He was off in the other end of Cole County running a road grader. He gets home, we're on the way to Tulsa on the Indian Nation Turnpike, and my cell phone rings, and it's the Shriners group out of Muskogee. And they said, you don't want to hear this, but we've got the surgeon on staff here at the hospital in Tulsa says this kid needs to go to a burn hospital. That's the year the Galveston hospital had blown away in a hurricane. So by the time I get to Tulsa, another God thing, there's a jet on a runway. We load me and her up, and they have us in Cincinnati by midnight or 1 o'clock because of the time change. The chief of staff is the on-call doctor that night. It's chief of plastic surgery. They take her into surgery that night. We're at the hospital for 7 weeks. She's in pressure garments from head to toe for a year. So I'm a little more protective of her and involved in her life than some moms are by the time a kid gets grown. So for me to give up, for me not to try to guide her career choices is real hard because we got really you develop a different bond with a kid and I put lotion on her skin grafts until she left to go to college. So every night of her life since she was 14. So we have a different relationship than some moms and daughters. And we've also had more difficulty separating and not being all enmeshed in each other's business. But the proudest moment I've had with her, and if you can imagine me prom dress shopping, it was not a pretty sight. She wants to go to Dallas we ended up in Fort Worth at this anyway. It was horrible. On a Saturday morning, there were 50 girls in this little shop, and all these moms who thought they were taking pictures. My sister went with us, she was taking pictures. I finally went outside at that event. But when we went prom dress shopping, because this kid has, and the donor sites where they took skin to put skin back on, I mean, it's just, her arms are a train wreck. And I went in thinking, okay, we're gonna find one of these little dresses with like the tulle, at least on the shoulders, where she's self-conscious about a donor site right here that they took skin off of to put on her face. We leave the dress shop with this strapless dress. And I knew at that point that she had gotten over whatever self-consciousness she had had up to that point. So I quit worrying about that stuff. And when she was a senior in high school, they were still wanting to do cosmetic stuff here on her face. And toward the end of her senior year, because she had turned 18, she told her doctor that she appreciated all they had done, but that she would no longer have time for this stuff. And because she came home and stayed extremely physically active, she's had no issues with the skin grafts drawn and making it hard for her to move. This summer, she has grafts, 30% of her body, skin grafted right here. And they told her that would tighten, and when it did, she'd have to have little surgeries to loosen the tension. She started going to yoga this summer. And she told me one night this week that she's already enrolled up there. So she's taking care of herself. So Mom has learned to let go. And I'm going to try not to tell her what she needs to do.
Really hard.
Really hard. For me, it's really hard.
So with all of that going on, was it surprising to you that she wanted to go to college, wanted to leave home and go so far away?
No, because in the pressure garments, she wore a cute little party dress to Winter Ball with pressure garments on, had her hair done, had, the whole 9 yards. In high school, little type A personality girl, was very, very, very active in all the FFA stuff in fact, we spent a lot of time at Stillwater at speech contest, and her little parliamentary procedure team worked up to third their senior year at the state level. And she was president of her local FFA chapter, was whatever 4-H, was president of the county 4-H by her senior year, always volunteered and was a teen counselor at the 4-H camps, went to Roundup, did all this stuff. Her senior year told me, I'm not running for a state office in FFA because I'm afraid I'd get it. But they called her and asked her to be one of the 2 students that was on the state selection committee for the FFA candidates. She went and paged a week for our state representative. She's a very, very self-confident, social little creature. And no, college was never, and even if she had not been self-confident, she would have gone to college somewhere. If I had to drive her, she would have gone. It was never, because from the time she was a little girl, it was just the next step after high school was college, period. Because she was a student. She doesn't have any problem maintaining her grades and those kinds of things. So
why did she choose OSU then?
Because that was her mama's home. And because in high school in Cole County, Oklahoma, if you're not an athlete, and she played basketball and they did softball and stuff until she got hurt. She lost all the toes on one foot, and her other foot, they took a muscle out of her thigh to rebuild her left foot. And she's got a skin graft on the bottom of it. So running and playing athletics, if she rides her horse working cattle 2 days in a row, right there on that foot is where your foot hits the stirrup, she'll have a pressure sore develop on that foot. She's got to be real careful with her feet. So athletics was not really an option. In Cole County, Oklahoma, when you're in school here, if you don't do athletics, you have FFA. Or FCLA, I think, but FFA was the fit for her. And so she was very, very, very active in FFA. Oklahoma State University is the college for kids wanting to be in the College of Agriculture. And even though she's doing the business route as opposed to animal husbandry or horticulture or whatever, in the College of Agriculture, it's like a perfect fit for her. Mm-hmm. And when she went to Oklahoma State, she went into the FIT dormitory, which is the freshman in transition, which she perceived as like a little special honors thing. I perceive it as the way that Oklahoma State University acclimates these little hillbilly kids. And that's exactly, in my mind, that's still what it is. And it's a wonderful thing because if I had had that when I went to OSU, I wouldn't have had the shock. You're still with people like you, and they help you branch out, into other things. And last year she lived in one of the other dorms and despised it because the people around her weren't a good fit for her. And she still spent all of her time with the friends from the original dorm. She didn't branch out at all as I hoped she would. But it's still okay. She's a good kid and a good student and loves Oklahoma State University. And the fact that it was my alma mater played into it. Yeah. And I told her, she could go where she wanted to. But she had been up there. I think these kids that go up there to Roundup and go up there to all these FFA events, it's like a natural draw. They're comfortable, they're familiar, and the College of Agriculture, I don't think, has any trouble getting people to come.
I think that's probably a fair assessment. It seems to be.
Yeah.
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 Oh gosh. So I have one sort of final question to wrap up on. It's kind of a two-part. So if you were to give advice to somebody thinking about social services or social work as a career path, what are some of the things that you think are important for people to either know about themselves or know about the career field before they choose to go into it?
Probably about themselves more than anything, and that's that you've got to either have or develop the ability to not be openly judgmental and whatever thoughts are going through your mind, because I assure you, there as a cockroach crawls across your notepad and the walls look like they're fluid with roaches, you've got to still respect these folks enough to go in and sit down at their table and talk to them. And if they ask you if you want a cup of coffee or a glass of tea, say you bet, and drink it and sit down and be there and be respectful and still have the ability to talk to them about things that they might do differently, to improve their quality of life. Mm-hmm. And you just got to be self-aware enough to be able to control your personal biases or thoughts about the way that people live. And that's before people go into that field, they need to do maybe in retrospect, probably an internship or where you actually go out with workers to people's homes and actually expose yourself to the fact, can you deal with the situation when a daycare center calls you and tells you they've got a 3-year-old with blood in his diaper? And a day later, when you find out that mama's boyfriend has raped this baby, you've got to be able to school yourself enough that you don't stay awake for a week and a half. It's okay to stay awake one night or 2 nights, because you will, because that kind of stuff scars you. But you've got to have enough of a sense of humor and a sense of self-control that you don't let that stuff destroy you. Because if you don't have that, you can't do social work at any level.
Very good advice. The second part of this is, if somebody is from a small community and they want to come back to a small community and thrive, what are some suggestions on how to be successful in that?
You need to be realistic about what job opportunities are here. And you need to, in this community, if you want to be in Cole County, get a degree where you can come back maybe as a loan officer at one of the banks. They make decent money. Come back and do social work. And be prepared to do child welfare, because that's where now the eligibility part is, they're cutting jobs there. But if you can do the child welfare, you can work your way up and you can make real decent money doing that. Become an RN, because we have a hospital and nursing home, and RNs make good money. Look around and decide what it is that you can do, because you don't want to work for $8 an hour. It's okay as a student, but when you come out and have to make house payments or rent or whatever, you've got to have enough to live the way you want to live. And you've got to look and see, if I live in Cole County, I can drive to Ada or McAllister or Durant to work. What's there, And we're back to healthcare, banking, maybe some retail. I don't know how folks do with that. I've never explored it or thought about it enough. The reality is, the manager of the local Sonic, when Sonic came to town, that family, and I'm not going to name names but her family was receiving food stamp benefits. She made a decision to go to work at Sonic. Very bright person with an incredible work ethic. Worked her way from a car hop on, makes over $100,000 a year now. So that opportunity is there. And what I'm trying to say is, don't overlook Sonic. Find out, go do some research and find out that if I want to go into hotel restaurant management, that opportunity's here for people that will work hard at it. But explore, all the options.
What made me think of that was part of your story is, it sounds like a very intentionality of, what can I get out of college that will help me be successful when I come back? And as a teenager, that is a really, I'm impressed that you were able to clearly think about that. And
the reality is that it took me, with the RSVP job, 32, 33 years to accomplish that. But at 56 years old, and I'm still, a decade away from Social Security benefits. But at 56 years old, I can take my little state retirement. I still have health insurance for me and Jacqueline, because it was cheaper than going on Jack's, so I've retained that. I get enough from that. We've got our cow herd, and I'm doing exactly what I want to do. And I think that's maybe a rare thing for people to be able to say that. And there was never a day that I was doing social work that I didn't want to go to work. I loved I had a passion and loved what I did. And that would be my other advice for people. Even if you want to come back to Cole County, Oklahoma, if you're not passionate about being a nurse, don't do that. You know, you've got to love and enjoy what you do. And if you don't have that joy, change jobs. I wouldn't care what it was. Mm-hmm. I can't imagine getting up and going to work every day to a place that you dreaded going. That would be hell on earth. Mm-hmm. But develop that joy about what you, even if you have to develop it, work on that and develop joy about what you do. And it all pays off in the end. Mm-hmm. We've got a comfortable home. Very, very, and our surroundings are geared more toward comfort than style, maybe. But we've got a comfortable home, we've got a comfortable income, to the point that we're not even sweating putting a kid through school. And if you'll work hard and have passion about what you do, that will all pay off.
Also good advice. Is there anything you think that we didn't talk about that you want to make sure that you cover?
No, Oklahoma State was a good experience for me in a very different way than it is for my child. Times have changed, but my economic situation, hers is very different than what mine is. Mm-hmm. But it's a good all-around school, and it's where little country kids can go and learn. In fact, I ought to show you on my phone. Sis sent me a text with a picture last night, and I couldn't figure out what the picture was of. But a Chinese exchange student who last year she started off being a little judgmental about those folks. He also is a kid that went to the New Zealand class with them. He looked her up this week after he had been home some for the summer, brought her a hairpin. And I think it's like the girls that wear the kimonos and put their hair up that they put through it. She's a TA for a professor, and in the spring semester, it's a land appraisal class that she says she hopes she never has to take because it's so hard. But she was a TA for this professor because she said, actually, it's just using algebraic and calculus formulas, which is something I can't even spell. You know, when you're social services, you don't do math. But anyway, she was a TA for this professor, and she was good enough at it that he has asked her to come back and help him again in the spring. This semester, she's working as a TA for one of the econ intro classes. But this Chinese exchange student was one of the students that she was a TA for last semester. Then they went on the New Zealand trip. He brought her this hairpin and said, I just want you to know that I very much appreciate how much you helped me in that class and how respectfully you have treated me. And I wanted you to know that means something to me, and brought her this hairpin. And she isn't typically someone who's touched by things, but she was touched by that. And I texted her back and I said, you need at one of your banquets to put your hair up and wear it. And she said, that's an excellent idea, I will. Mm-hmm. So what hasn't changed is that OSU still exposes you to people and practices that are different than what you learn in Cole County, Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. And given time up there, you learn to be more accepting. You mature, and you come out of there with the ability to do what you want to do and achieve your dreams. And I assure you that at the time that I went to college, Mother and Daddy were still eating venison year-round because the cattle were all mortgaged. Mm-hmm. So we've come from that point to I'm comfortable. My daddy is wealthy. And it's from focusing and having a work ethic in my mind. Mm-hmm. And God's grace. But anyway, just go Pokes, and kids just need to, the colleges are doing so much better job now. The FIT program is an example. they are doing a better job of making sure that their graduates are successful. So I'm really proud of our state and our school.
Fantastic. Well, thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.